After being gone a lot since the beginning of May, September finally rolled around, and with it a chance to complete some projects around the house before the winter season would take me on the road again for talks. bathroom really is the most neglected room in the Hermitage, which is fine. I don't spend that much time there. I never understood why people take a newspaper to the loo. Everything in here I inherited. But if I wanted to modernize the room, I would just be adding to some landfill. Everything works, so it would be for purely aesthetic reasons. That is not necessary. There was one thing, however, I thought would be a nice project: the floor. Linoleum was all the rage in the 80s, but let's cover it up already. When I was 12, a lot of the farmhouse in which I grew up had to be restored after a fire. My father had the idea to use 4x4 end-grain timber cuts for some of the flooring, of which I then spent my summer laying, gluing, grinding and sealing some 2,500 square feet. My pocket money increased substantially, which I put towards my first mountain bike. I thought it might be nice to do a twist on my first building job and use round cut-offs from branches instead.
Johanna,
Oh,
bloembollen.
bloemenbollen. Dutch delivery service. All in all, it looks all right. The bathroom is still no oasis, but it doesn't have to be. The wall could use some paint. And if it were not so tight because of the bidet, I could even cover the pipes. We'll see. I've been working hard to finish the new book. But the great thing is, when I need a break, I just step outside. There's always something on the list. This time around, I'm clearing a space adjacent to the garden. I did not get very far before the rain set in. Back to the book, I guess. When I bought the house, this angle had been tidy, but since, it has turned into a jungle. The idea is to enlarge the garden into this direction in 2024. I also have plans for the terraces above, if I get to them. Bracken has taken over what, according to my neighbor, were small fields of rye and terraces for grazing livestock 60 years ago. I wanted to open up some spaces for next year, but somehow the flies seemed upset with my plan. It was an unusual storm at the hour of sunrise, but as usual, at least from a distance, a mighty display. The best I was ever able to record was some decade ago near the town of Hope in North Dakota. The parcel that Martijn had brought up from the kind people that receive our packages contained about 2,200 bulbs of spring flowers. Bloembollen, if I remember the Dutch. I'm now either preparing a glorious spring meadow, or I engage in the most comprehensive feeding of mice ever undertaken on this mountain. The reality, I imagine, will be somewhere in between. The cows are returning to the valley. Summer is at its end. As peaceful as these mountains seem in days like these, they have witnessed many an injustice. Since the Middle Ages, they have been home to the Waldensians, a religious movement which in its beginnings had parallels to the Franciscan reform. The latter went on to have a long-lasting transformative effect on the Catholic Church, which was then experiencing a crisis in many places. The former went a different path. The Waldensians take their name from their founder, Peter Waldo, who tradition says was a merchant from Lyon who, struck by the gospel, much like St. Francis, and living about the same time, renounced his wealth and became poor. He set out with his followers to preach Christ as he understood him. In those times there was much decadence of churchmen ripe for criticism. Popular movements of different stripes sprang up everywhere. Peter Waldo himself was cited to Rome, but the result of the questioning was inconclusive. Only later were some of the tenets his followers spread declared to be in conflict with the faith received from the apostles. Movements, beginning with intentions of reform, often radicalized. They denounced what was deemed holy by others, absconded from society, or what bound it together. Attacks, conflicts, warring, and persecutions followed. When I look out from my place into the plains below, I can see both places where Waldensians murdered Dominican friars, and where Waldensian families were expelled from their houses or massacred by troops of the Catholic rulers of Savoy. History, as well as the present, is full of violence. We may decry it. We may even believe ourselves to be above it. But in the end, we are all sons and daughters of murderers, thieves, rapists, of intrigue and infidelity. If you think that you are not, you are simply not going back far enough in your family tree. There is something very sober about the Christian religion. While sometimes accused of dreaming up the heavens, its starting point is the undeniable earthly fact that man is touched by evil. Its faith may proclaim with joy the hope of man's redemption, but only after being convicted of his fall. When Christianity was rejected in the Enlightenment, this was almost the first thing that went overboard. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote, "There is no original perversity in the human heart." He romanticized the natural state of man. It was civilization, institutions such as monogamy and private property that inflamed the passions and destroyed the peace. Unspoiled man was friend to all creation and enemy to none, except maybe when hungry. He echoed naive ideas described earlier in the story of the noble savage, and was succeeded by centuries of fantasies about the intrinsic goodness of man. But at any time, any common maid could have informed those romantics and philosophers that a child left to its own will and devices will not develop into an angel, but into a demon. It will not be loving and kind, but an unbearable narcissist of gravitational proportion. Nor would any honest look into our human past warrant great optimism. The Native Americans, as much as the Maori of New Zealand, committed massacres on a regular basis. In fact, 90% of buried human remains from the 13th century in an area in the southwest of the United States show trauma from blows to the head or limbs, suggesting to archaeologists a violent explanation about how the population dwindled from 40,000 to 0 in just 3 decades. And that more than 3 centuries before any European ever walked there. Natives of Borneo were headhunters. Aztecs enslaved surrounding tribes and offered them as human sacrifice. The Polynesians fought constantly, maintaining a highly restrictive society that bequeathed us the word taboo. You could be killed for seemingly slight offenses. And Africa was no Wakanda. The problem is not that we dream of paradise. A paradise we may have lost if all stories are to be believed. The real problems begin when we judge ourselves able to realize paradise. The weakness of all utopias is this, that they take the greatest difficulty of man and assume it to be overcome, and then give an elaborate account of the overcoming of the smaller ones. They first assume that no man will want more than his share, and then are very ingenious in explaining whether his share will be delivered by motor car or balloon. Chesterton wrote these words in 1905. He wrote them before the worst fruits of utopist thinking ravaged the earth. For the most costly aberrations from faith and reason were yet to be attempted on a large scale in the decades that followed. National Socialism and Communism. Though bitter enemies, they were both children of the same mother, the belief in the perfectibility of man, and that we could be the ones doing the perfecting. The one subscribed to social Darwinism and tried to find and breed a race of superhumans. The other used the power of the state to engineer the perfect, peaceful, international society of equality and equity. Each of these utopias by itself left more than 50 million dead. You cannot, after all, make an omelette without cracking a few eggs, it was said. How cynical. And we are not out of the woods yet. Transhumanism is the next project of futurists to design a better humanity. I have no doubt that any attempt will be in the wake of more human tragedy. It is probably not by accident that one of the oldest human stories tells of a garden and man's wish to be like God. They do not respect the given reality, but want to determine themselves good and evil. Of all the futures that lie before us, I hope we will choose every day one grounded not in the fancies of dreams and the power of the will, but in reality. And that reality acknowledges our weakness. It is not, at least in a Christian perspective, a fatalist and hopeless reality. Christ, after all, is seen as its Savior. But the path he lines out is not one of working towards self-redemption and an earthly paradise, but one of sanctification. In the biblical view, that which is holy, that which is sanctus, or in Hebrew, kadosh, means literally that which is set apart. To sanctify your life means to set it apart. Apart from what? From what the New Testament quite sternly calls the world. Man's final end is not found among the finite and perishable possessions, nor in the greatest of the societies of man, not even among the beautiful grandeurs of creation. It is found in a communion with Him who transcends all and thus can be the end of all. We are to be in the world, but not of the world, according to Christ. We need to understand ourselves as pilgrims passing through. We have to look beyond the physical to what is therefore called metaphysical. Without metaphysics, all that is left is politics. And politics devoid of the right metaphysics, for all the good desires, hopes and dreams of man, leads in the end to a very earthly hell. Let us not go there again.